question.
Thank you. Last Concur, I can ask the Minister for Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht her plans for War of Independence and Civil War commemorations in the county of Wexford.
Sir, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy. My objective in approaching the development of the state commemorative programmes for the year from 2019 up until 2023 is to ensure that in remembering this complex period in our history, which includes the struggle for independence, the Civil War, the foundation of the state and partition, that we promote a deeper understanding of the significance of these events, which accepts that the shared historical experience of those years gave rise to very different narratives and memories. And on the 8th of January, I outlined how the Government plans to approach the development of the commemorative programme for the coming period. And under the community strand, I am encouraging a collaborative approach similar to which was adopted for the 1916 centenary commemorations between the state, the local authority network and community organisations, including in Northern Ireland where appropriate. And it is, I believe, very fitting that the local authorities have a leading role in supporting inclusive, respectful and meaningful community-led commemorations which remember all of the lives lost, augmented as appropriate with support from the state, which will be considered, of course, on a case-by-case basis, and in recognition as well of the very important role that the local authorities have played to date and will continue to have in encouraging measured and authentic citizen engagement, which is sensitive to the local context. And I have requested my officials to organise a special Decade of Centenaries forum for the local authorities, which, as I said earlier, will take place on the 13th of March. And with regard to the Deputy's specific query, I can confirm that I have approved funding of £5,000 to support each of the local authorities, including Wexford County Council, in developing commemorative activities in 2018. And I will make a further announcement in respect of funding for 2019 shortly, Deputy. And funding allocations over the coming years will be considered as part of the annual budgetary estimates process. But I encourage all local authorities to adopt a broad focus in responding to the significant events and themes for this period, which recognise all of the dimensions interwoven with the conflict, the military activity, the political context and the social, economic and cultural aspects and legacies.
The remainder will be in the official report. Deputy John Browne.
Thank you, Minister. I've been asking this question for some time now. Obviously, the period between 1916 and 1923 was very turbulent throughout the country, but in particularly in Wexford's history. In 1916, the Wexford rebels took in Escorty town during the Easter Rising, and then subsequently Wexford was very active in both the War of Independence and the Civil War. During the War of Independence, there was numerous attacks on Royal Irish Constabulary barracks. The Black and Tans were introduced. There was raids. There was counter-raids. It became quite vicious. Many people in Wexford were imprisoned, often mistreated, often tortured. Many escaped from these prisons. After the signing of the treaty, the IRA in Wexford was very much split down the middle. And during the subsequent Civil War, Wexford was very heavily involved. And local historians Furlong and Hayes in their book state that the split between anti-treaty and pro-treaty adherents was countrywide, but County Wexford became one of the most violent counties in the Civil War. The conflict which scarred and divided families followed a pattern, again, of guerrilla warfare. So I'm just wondering, Minister, specifically, can you outline what your department intends to do in terms of commemorating events, both for the War of Independence and the Civil War in the County of Wexford? You mentioned an announcement. I'm wondering when that announcement is going to be made in terms of further funding, and will there be a list available of the events that are intended to be commemorated in the County of Wexford?
I can tell the Deputy I will be making that announcement shortly, but also, and I've heard what you said about 1916, the commemorative events that took place in Wexford. I know the restoration of the Enniscorthy Athenaeum was an important one, and there was an interactive 1916 exhibition as well, and there was also a County Council grant scheme there. But it might be good for the Deputy to know that Wexford County Council didn't actually make a submission in the public consultation in relation to commemorating the Decade of Centenaries. There were 20 submissions received by local authorities, and none of which included Wexford. That's not to say that they will be precluded from participating in the local authority collective group on the 13th of March, and they will then be in a position to make a submission by the 30th of April in terms of any ideas that they have in terms of the key themes from the Expert Advisory Council points that they wish to take on board.
Thank you, Minister. Obviously, careful thought and planning of these events have to take place. Memories even to this day are still raw, so they are. The 2016 events were very well received in my own county of Wexford, and it is imperative the same sensitive note obviously is forthcoming for upcoming events. But equally, commemorations should take place. Sensitivity obviously should not be an excuse for avoidance. This is about our history, it's about the birth of our nation, and it's about Ireland rightfully taking its place among the independent nations of the world. I am somewhat surprised that Wexford County Council did not make a submission, as I think in 1916 events they were very heavily involved, and perhaps it may just have been an oversight on their part. Thank you.
Minister, I would urge you to make a substantial announcement, given that the most successful aspect for many of the centenary events in 2016 was the local events, which were funded by the department and also by local authorities and right around the country. The 5,000 that you've mentioned for each local authority is obviously an initial one to help them with their plans, but hopefully you will be ensuring that a substantial amount would be available to encourage local authorities to match whatever funding you come up with, and to follow on from the success that they had to deal with the next 5 or 6 years of the centenary programme.
Yeah, and I can tell Deputy Ó Snodaigh that Dublin City Council did make a submission, and again, no more than Deputy Browne's Wexford County Council. All local authorities will be in a position to contribute to the forum on the 13th of March, and in all local authorities will be in a position to make a submission by the 30th of April in terms of any ideas and any suggestions that they have for their particular county in commemorating the next decade of centenaries, and taking into account the expert advisory group's recommendations and the key themes. And it's worthwhile, Elas Ceann Comhairle, perhaps reiterating some of those. They have all said that the local stories and experience, which you have both said, will be very significant, and local research, scholarship and access to local archival sources will support communities in exploring and reflecting upon these events. And I think a collaborative approach, Deputy Browne, is something that I think would be of assistance. The local cultural organisations and the library networks have a significant role to play, as well as cultural brokers, managing conversations and building relationships and engaging communities in a meaningful way through the various forms of creative expression. So there will be huge opportunities there for each county to become involved.